Hello, Ms. Briscoe here for today's math lesson. I hope you all are having a great week. So you're going to need these notes for the math lesson today. If you don't have them, go ahead and pause the video and print them out. They're going to be below the video in your lesson under math today. Our learning goal is I can rewrite a pair of fractions so that they have a common denominator. So let's go ahead and look at our goal and pull out the important pieces to make sure we understand what we're going to be learning about today, because our learning goal tells us what we're going to be learning about and what we're going to be accomplishing at the end of our lesson and assignments. So I can rewrite a pair of fractions so they have a common denominator. Well, one word that you should know already is a denominator. And the denominator in a fraction, if you have a fraction, 1/2, the denominator is the bottom number. It's the bottom number in a fraction. I'm going to go ahead and take the light off so you can see that. So we're going to be rewriting fractions so they have a common denominator. Well, common means same. So we're rewriting fractions so they have the same denominator. That's going to be a really important step when it comes time for you to add and subtract fractions, because for you to add and subtract fractions, they have to have a common denominator or the same denominator. You cannot add fractions that have different denominators. So if we look at our vocabulary, we have common denominator, and it says 2 or more fractions with the same denominator. So that means that you would have 1/2, 2/2. Their denominators are the same. Or if I had 6/7, 3/7, and 1/7, those all have the same denominator. Now, the next thing is we have the least common denominator. That means 2 or more fractions with the same denominator that is the smallest factor for both numbers. And so we're going to get a little bit into what that means. So let's say I'm wanting to add 1/2 plus 1/4. Well, I can't add those because their denominators are different. They need to have the same denominator for me to add them. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at 2 different ways to find the common denominator for that. The first way that you can do it is you can just multiply the numbers, and that's just going to give you a common denominator. So multiplying the denominators just gives you a common denominator, which is okay, but you're going to have to sometimes simplify your fraction. So if I'm doing 1/2 plus 1/4, all that means is that I take my 1/2, or my 2 and my 4, I take my denominators and I multiply them. So that is going to give me 8. That means the denominator on the bottom, the common denominator between these two fractions, is 8. All I did was multiply my denominators together to get the new denominators. So what the rule for this is, when you multiply the denominators, the rule is what you do to the bottom. So what you do to the denominator, you do to the top. So you do to the numerator. So that means that if you multiply the bottom by a number, you have to multiply the top by a number. So in this instance, we multiplied 2 times 4 to get 8. That means we need to multiply the top number by 4. So 1 times 4 equals 4. So 1/2 turned into 4/8. You can tell they still equal the same amount. 1 is half of 2, and 4 is half of 8. So 4/8 really is 1/2. Well, I multiplied 4 times 2 to get 8, so I need to multiply the top number, 1 times 2, to get 8. So 1 times 2 is 2. So now what I have done is I have taken my 2 fractions that I'm adding and I've created a common denominator. They both have 8 on the bottom. So now I can add them. So all you do when you add fractions is you add the tops. So 4 plus 2 equals 6. So I have added my 2 fractions and the answer would be 6/8. That's what you would do when you multiply the bottom denominators to come up with a common denominator. This is sometimes tricky because it's not going to give you the fraction in simplest form. 6/8 can be simplified. And so what that means is if you're looking at 6/8 like this, I'm going to divide my fraction into 8 pieces. Okay, and if I were to shade in 6 of them, there is a fraction that is the same fraction, but it's with smaller numerators and denominators that I could show here. And so what that fraction is, sorry, I didn't shade in all of them, so that's 6/8. What that fraction is that fraction is 3/4. Do you see how those are the same fraction? But it's just using less pieces. The way that you get there is you have to simplify your fraction, and that's something that we are going to learn about a little bit later. But that is just something that when you multiply the denominators, you're not going to get the simplest form. The next strategy that I'm going to show you is how you're going to get the simplest form of a fraction, and you're not going to have to worry about a next step later on down the road. So let's use the same one. So I have 1/2 plus 1/4. We're going to use the same problem. I need to use a list to find the least common denominator. So what that means is that I need to list out all of my factors for each of my denominators. So I have 2 and 4. Those are my denominators. I need to list out all of the factors. Well, 2 I know is just multiply by 1. Sorry, you're listing out all of the products for that, not factors. So you're listing out when you multiply them. So you would do 2, you're going to do 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So you're going to list out a couple. Okay, so those are a couple of the products for 2, that when you multiply 2, those are some of the products that you would get. So let me go ahead and multiply out my 4s. So see, I have 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. And so what you want to do is you want to say, okay, do they have any in common? And you want to find the least one that they have in common. Well, if I look, both 2 and 4 have a 4. So that means that's going to be the least common denominator because it's the smallest number that they both have in common, the smallest product. So what that means is that I'm going to have to rewrite my fractions with 4 on the bottom. So what did I multiply 2 by to get 4? Well, I know that 2 times 2 equals 4. So what I do to the bottom, I have to do the top. So 1 times 2 equals 2. So then 4 times what equals 4? Well, 4 times 1. That means I multiply the top by 1. 1 times 1 equals 1. So I'm going to add those together. 2 plus 1 equals 3. 3/4 is my answer. So do you see how up here we added the same fractions, but we got 2 different answers, but those 2 different answers equal the same thing. This is 3/4 written out. It is the same as 6/8. It's just in a simpler version using smaller numbers. That's why making the list can sometimes be easier because you won't have to worry about simplifying your fractions later on down the road. So let me go ahead and have you try it. So what I want you to do is we're going to be adding, let's draw a little line here to separate our problems. We're going to be adding 4/6 plus 2/3. Okay? I want you to go ahead and pause the video, and you can use whichever strategy that you would like to add these 2 fractions. Okay, so hopefully you paused the video and you used some strategies to add these 2 fractions. I'm first going to show you the strategy of multiplying the denominators, and then I will show you the strategy for finding the least common denominator by using a list. So let's go ahead and do multiplying the denominators. So 6 times 3 equals 18. So I'm going to rewrite my fraction, and we're going to put 18 there. So 6 times what equals 18? Well, it's 6 times 3 equals 18 because I multiplied them together. That means I need to multiply 4 times 3, which is 12. So then 3 times 6 equals 18, so this needs to be multiplied by 6. 2 times 6 is 12. Sorry. So 2 times 6 equals 12. So now I need to add 12 and 12 together, which is going to equal 24. And then I write my 18 on the bottom. So 24/18 is what I get when I multiply my denominators together. So now we're going to make a list. So I'm going to write out, we're going to do this is our second step where we make a list and find the least common denominator. So 6 goes 6, 12, 18, 24. 3 goes 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. Well, I can see that 6 is going to be the least common denominator. So I'm going to rewrite my fractions using a 6. So I'm going to think, okay, let's mark off these up here. 6 times 1, so I have to multiply 4 times 1. 6 times 1 equals 6, so 4 times 1 equals 4. So then I have 3 times what equals 6? Well, I know that 3 times 2 equals 6. So 3 times 2 equals 6. That means I need to do 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4. So if I were to add those together, 4 plus 4 equals 8/6. So that's a way that you can find the least common denominator. I'm going to go ahead and move that up for you. All right, so if you guys have any questions, please let me know. You can always pause and rewind this video and go ahead and work on your rest of your lessons and assignments for today.